What comes to mind when you first think of America? Is it freedom? Controversial politics? Sprayable cheese in a can? Grape soda that tastes nothing like grapes? There's so much to love about America, but so much that freaks the rest of the world out. But as the world's most powerful country, it's no surprise the good old US of A likes to do things differently. From hate speech to circumcision, in this video I'll tell you about just some of the ways America differs from the rest of the world. Number 10. Gun ownership rates. We all know America likes to do things a little differently, and there's no exception when it comes to guns. Today, America accounts for just over 4% of the world's population. But did you know that today it owns between 35% and 50% of the world's guns? That means there are 120 guns shared between every 100 people. To put this in perspective, that means in the US alone there are around 393 million guns, with only about 1 million of these being registered. Sounds crazy, right? So how does this compare with the rest of the world? Well, currently, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, and Indonesia have 0% gun ownership. Meanwhile, in the middle of the spectrum, European countries such as France and Germany sit around the 20% gun ownership mark. So why are there so many guns in the United States? Is it just that Americans like to shoot things? Or is there more to it? Although some people might say otherwise, America's fascination with guns isn't just because they like shooting stuff for the hell of it. In a country that promotes an individualistic social paradigm, owning a gun stands alongside the constitutional right to bear arms against a tyrannical government. The right to own guns is enshrined in the Second Amendment and was designed to protect Americans during the Revolution against the British. Many argue the gun is a symbol of individual rights that not only represents the freedom to bear arms, but other freedoms too. Number 9. Circumcision. Ideas about circumcision differ radically around the world. European countries aren't so hot on the idea, with only around 1/5 of men getting the procedure. And some countries such as Denmark are debating whether it should be legal at all during infancy, or whether the man should decide once he reaches adulthood. America, on the other hand, is fairly relaxed about it, with 6 out of 10 male babies leaving the hospital without their foreskins. This is a tradition shared with strict Muslim countries such as Morocco, Tajikistan, and Yemen, where up to 99% of the male population gets circumcised. But the USA even has a tradition of exporting the practice. Let's take a look at East Asia, where hardly any baby boys get the snip. One of the few places where the practice is still in fashion is South Korea, an American ally that has hosted thousands of US Army personnel for decades. It has been theorized that circumcision was passed on to South Koreans by US servicemen after the Korean War in the 1950s. And surprise, surprise, you look over the border to North Korea, and we're back to a typical Asian scene. Not a circumcision in sight. Number 8. Incarceration rates. In recent years, America has produced some of the best true crime television. From Making a Murderer to The Staircase, we're hooked on it. So with the American penal system under such scrutiny, it's inevitable that viewers have learned some shocking facts about the American criminal justice system. One of these inconvenient truths is that the United States currently has the highest number of prisoners in the entire world, with just over 2.4 million people currently incarcerated. To put this into perspective, the next country down the list is China, with 1.5 million prisoners. But because of their huge population, these prisoners account for just 0.1% of the country. Meanwhile, it is currently estimated that 0.7% of the American population is behind bars. Put another way, America accounts for just 5% of the world's population, but a gigantic 25% of the world's prisoners. But why is this? Can we assume that there are just more criminals in the United States in comparison to everywhere else in the world? Are we somehow more likely to commit crimes than, say, Canadians or Mexicans? The short answer is no. There are many reasons behind America's high incarceration rates. Strict drug laws, bail policies, the criminalization of poverty, economic polarization, and many other factors. It's a complex issue, but don't worry, we're not just naturally crooks. Number 7. Passport rates. In a world where travel has never been easier, and when all it takes is a quick form to gain a passport, you'd be forgiven for thinking nearly everyone had one. But do we? For years, there has been a rumor that only 10% of the US citizens own a passport, a stark contrast to countries such as the United Kingdom, where around 83% of inhabitants own one. But how true is this? Well, in a nutshell, not very. Way back in the early 90s, it was unusual for US citizens to hold a passport, but since then, the number has been steadily increasing. At the moment, it's estimated that around 40% of US citizens own a passport, and although this is a relatively low number in comparison to other countries, it's by no means the lowest. For example, only 8.7% of the Chinese population own a passport, while this number is even lower in India, where passports are owned by a mere 5% of the population. Number 6. Universal healthcare. So I've already mentioned America's strong individualistic identity, but this distinct sense of national self goes far beyond gun ownership. Unlike other first world countries, America currently does not have universal healthcare. This means major operations such as kidney transplants that are free in some countries can cost anywhere between $200,000 and $400,000 in the US. There are many arguments as to why the United States won't adopt universal healthcare, but a big reason is simply that lots of people don't want it. That's because they believe the government should have as little involvement as possible in people's lives, and that includes healthcare. In a recent study, it was revealed that only 37% of Americans believe that healthcare is a right. But are things about to change? It appears that attitudes might be turning around. With a growing dissatisfaction with the current system, more and more people are considering the idea of a more universal form of healthcare. A recent survey showed how 1 in 4 Americans didn't seek medical treatment because they couldn't afford it. Meanwhile, 70% of Americans now agree that Medicare should be available to everyone. So does it look like the US will adopt universal healthcare after all? In these uncertain times, it's difficult to say. Some optimists suggest that Americans will support the idea eventually, even if it takes a decade or two. Elsewhere in the US, people get angry at the mere thought of it. Before I reveal the next example, you should subscribe if you're enjoying the video. We upload amazing fact-filled list videos daily. Also, make sure to click that bell icon to stay updated, or you'll regret missing out on some amazing knowledge that could have filled your brain. Now let's get back to it. Number 5. Refrigerating eggs. If you've ever visited the States and thought it was weird folk keep their eggs in the refrigerator, then you're not the only one. One weird little fact about America is that unlike pretty much everywhere else in the world, we have to keep our eggs refrigerated. But why is this? One reason is that only in America do eggs get mechanically washed as part of the packing process. This may sound like a good thing, but it's actually a pretty stupid idea in the long run. The cleansing process strips out the egg's natural defenses and makes them more susceptible to bacteria, like the potentially deadly salmonella. So, refrigerating eggs keeps them safe to eat, our way of fixing a problem that never needed to be fixed. You can't beat old Uncle Sam. Number 4. Importance of religion. In a modern world where people are more likely to worship celebrity icons like Kim Kardashian than Jesus, it's no surprise that organized religion is on the decline. More than ever, people are forgetting all about religion, replacing trips to church with trips to the mall. However, in a world with less and less God in it, America still holds strong religious values. 80% of Americans identify as Christian, with around a third of these claiming to be born again. Meanwhile, 50% of American Christians say they make a point of praying at least once a day. A recent survey revealed that religion is personally important to 52% of Americans, compared to only 14% in France. What's interesting about this is that usually the poorer somewhere is, the more religious it is, with richer countries tending to lean more towards atheism. So why are the wealthy Americans so religious? Some experts have said it's because America's huge wealth is so unequally distributed. This unreliability of the economy means people turn to religion for the stability they need instead. Sociologists Engelhardt and Norris have argued that religion in the US is like a defense mechanism that helps keep vulnerable communities together in the face of economic and social hardship. Number 3. Greater tolerance of hate speech. Read the First Amendment and you'll see a written guarantee of the right to free speech, a privilege that simply doesn't exist in many other countries. Unfortunately, protecting free speech means protecting all its forms, and this includes hate speech. Whether people agree with it or not, 77% of US citizens believe that they should have the right to make statements that are offensive to someone's religious beliefs. Meanwhile, 67% of Americans believe they should be able to make offensive remarks about an ethnic minority. This number is far lower in European countries such as Poland, where less than 50% of people agree it's acceptable to make offensive remarks, and in Italy, where only 32% agree with the right to offend minorities. Some have suggested this is because of Europe's long history of religious and racial prejudice. But then again, hasn't the US experienced that too? Number 2. Sports. It's generally assumed that English-speaking countries prefer ball sports and colder climates prefer games like hockey. But when it comes to sport, soccer reigns supreme as the world's most popular. That is, unless you're in America, of course. Once again, the United States bucks the trend with its obsession with American football. But why don't we play soccer like the rest of the planet? There are many reasons, but the most interesting theory is that Americans love football because of its similarities with war. With head coaches as generals and quarterbacks as field generals, the players line up face to face in combat in order to gain ground. Each game is a battle that can only be won with careful strategizing and tactical scheming. Football is central to American culture. Whether you watch it on TV or play it in high school, it permeates every section of American society across every state. With over 100 million people watching the last Super Bowl, it's clear the game isn't going to be knocked off the top spot anytime soon. Number 1. Numbers. There are only 3 countries in the entire world who don't adhere to the metric system: Myanmar, Liberia, and the good old US of A. Over the years, there have been various attempts to convince the American public that the more user-friendly decimal-based system should be used, ranging from Thomas Jefferson failing to convince scientists in 1789 to Alexander Graham Bell failing to convince Congress in 1906. But why is this? The usual argument is because it would be far too expensive and time-consuming for the entire American workforce to make the change. Meanwhile, you may have noticed Americans have another eccentric habit when it comes to numbers. If you've ever wondered why the rest of the world writes their dates backwards, you're not alone. Writing the day before the month may seem peculiar to us, but it's actually totally normal to the entire rest of the world. So why do we do it? Well, nobody knows. Just like we don't know the meaning of life or why round pizzas come in square boxes, some things are just like that. We can all agree that America likes to do things its own way. But is this a good thing? Would the world be a better place if America followed another country's example? Or maybe it should be the rest of the world that should be more like us? What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.